What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name's Chris and here we explore products, places, and things that help us live a more enjoyable life. SL7 versus Aethos. Look, this was never supposed to be a long drawn out saga. So I'll share my final decision and then I'll share my thoughts on both of these bikes as a comparison after riding one for over 6,000 miles, the Tarmac, and the Aethos for a little over 1,000 miles. And if this is your first time watching, I bought an Aethos in December, absolutely loved it. I had planned to sell my Tarmac SL7 to more or less cover the cost of the Aethos, but of course, who buys a new bike in December? So my Tarmac sat in the garage and I started to ride it more and more and more, and I was reminded how much I love the SL7. So I've had this debate on my hands. Do I keep the Specialized Aethos or do I keep the Specialized Tarmac SL7? As always, I share my perspective on both of these bikes. As someone who may be a little bit like you, I enter the occasional race. I ride around 7,500 miles a year and I don't get paid to ride a bike. But man, do I love smashing the pedals with friends in between real life, family, work, and social obligations. So let's just cut to the chase. The final decision. I'm keeping the Aethos, but maybe not for the reasons that you might think. If all things were equal, I would keep the Tarmac, but unfortunately in this situation, all things are not equal. The Tarmac has 11-speed Dura-Ace Di2, whereas the Aethos has 12-speed SRAM Red ETAP Axis. The Tarmac has a set of Revolve CLX 64s with ceramic bearings in the hubs. The Aethos has a brand new set of NV45 AR discs with ceramic speed coated bearings in the hubs. And it has an XDR hub driver. So I'm able to take that wheel set from the Aethos and I'm able to put it on the Crux, which allows me to travel with one bike and two wheel sets, which was my original plan all along when I kind of started this bike shuffle later in the year last year. And my other bike as well is Axis. So I've got a Specialized Epic with Axis, I've got a Crux with Axis, and now having an Aethos with Axis just keeps everything in the same family, makes it easy to swap batteries, and it's just a seamless switch between the different bikes. Could I swap the drivetrain from the Aethos and put it on the Tarmac? Yes, I could, but I really don't want to go through that hassle and I don't want to incur that additional expense right now. And look, if there's one thing that I've learned from the Aethos, it's that it holds its own. I've taken the Aethos out on a fast group ride on a Tuesday and then the Tarmac out on another fast group ride on a Thursday, and they both perform incredibly well, even though sometimes I feel like I'm still dating the Aethos and kind of understanding exactly how it performs. Having ETAP Axis on this build also makes me feel like this bike is a little bit more future-proof, if you will. I mean, you guys know what it's like. It's 2022, the bike industry is crazy. It's really difficult to get drivetrains. I mean, go try to get a hydro shifter. It's nearly impossible to find parts and components right now. So I kind of want to hold on to the 12-speed group set. I feel like it's going to hold its value. I feel like it's a little bit more future-proof. And for me personally, there's a lot of value in that alone. So there you have it. That's the final decision of the SL7 versus the Aethos. Again, this wasn't supposed to be a long drawn-out saga. In theory, the Tarmac would have sold and I would have just ridden the Aethos off into the sunset and I would have never thought again about the Tarmac. But because it was in my garage and because it kind of nagged at me to be ridden, I rode it again and remembered why I love that bike so much. But ultimately, the Aethos won out for a handful of different reasons. So let's dive into now SL7 versus Aethos and my thoughts after riding the SL7 for 6,000 miles and the Aethos after 1,000 miles. And my thoughts have changed since the original video I made a few months back. My first takeaway from this experience or this comparison is that I think you need to ride a bike for about 500 miles to really get a good feel for it. Initial impressions of a brand new bike are almost always positive, right? You've never had someone come out on new bike day and say like, this bike sucks, it's not that great, right? A new bike shifts well, everything's tight, it performs incredibly well, it feels new, it just feels really, really good. I remember after riding the Aethos and then jumping back on the SL7, I felt like the SL7 was clunky, it felt too stiff, too nimble, it felt too twitchy. It just was an overall poor experience after riding a brand new Aethos. Now, I did a quick tune-up on it, adjusted a few things, gave the Tarmac a good wash, and it was back to that old feeling that I had with the Tarmac, which I absolutely love. Now, if you're one of those ones who said, dude, but you convinced me to buy an Aethos, yeah, you have an incredible bike. You cannot go wrong with the Aethos or the Tarmac SL7. They're both fantastic bikes. Aesthetically, I think the Aethos still wins. It's that classic look, it's the clean lines, it's just a really, really good looking bike. I like what I did with my build, with the deeper wheels, the bulkier stem, the understated branding. It kind of has like a minimalist feel to it, and I really, really like that look. So in my mind, the Aethos wins on aesthetics. I just think it's a super clean, simple, beautiful bike. Value-wise, I still believe that the Tarmac is the better value of the two bikes. See, if the Aethos is for the casual rider, does the casual rider really need a 5-figure bike? Definitely not. But I suppose you could also make the same argument for the Tarmac. Do any of us really need 5-figure bikes? Probably not. But if we're going there and you're comparing the two, I think the Tarmac is a better value because you get increased aerodynamics and performance. And yes, the Aethos is a little bit lighter, but still I believe that the Tarmac is a better value. I made the comparison before that the Aethos was kind of like a 911 Turbo and the Tarmac was like a 911 Turbo S. And if both of those were the exact same price, I think it'd be hard to argue that the Turbo S or the Tarmac was not a better value than the Turbo or the Aethos. See, because even if you don't use all of those performance and aerodynamic benefits that come with the Tarmac or the Turbo S, they're still there, and there's still incredible value in knowing that they're there. Look, if you really want to talk value, let's skip the S-Works, let's skip the Pro, and let's just get the expert model in each of these bikes, and then take the money that you saved, which is a significant amount of money, and put that towards a good bike fit, a coach or a training plan, and a nutritionist. And I think that's kind of just the reality of performance gains, is that money could be spent much better elsewhere, and you could get incredible gains as opposed to just getting a lighter or more stiff frame or a lighter component group. I think that's just the reality of cycling. When it comes to performance, this is where I stand partially corrected, and I'm reminded that you really need to get about 500 miles on a bike before you can truly understand how it rides and how it performs, especially when you're comparing it against a bike that you've ridden for over 5,000 miles, which is more or less the amount of miles I had on the SL7 when I bought the Aethos. Now, the Aethos is noticeably less stiff than the Tarmac SL7. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you are someone who's racing and accelerating out of corners and doing crits and truly sprinting for a finish and a podium spot, the Aethos may not be quite right for you, because you will stress the limits of the Aethos and you will wish that you had the stiffness and the snappiness of the Tarmac. It's also worth mentioning that I'm giving you this perspective from someone who's 185 pounds. So if you're 155 pounds or 140 pounds, you may find that the Aethos is plenty stiff for your needs, for sprint finishes in a race, for accelerating out of corners. It may feel plenty snappy to you at that weight. But I can tell you at 185 pounds, I can tell a difference between the Aethos and the Tarmac. And if you're much lighter than me, you may think the Tarmac is just absolutely too stiff and it's just not quite the right bike for you. So I think that's worth mentioning, and I think it's worth considering when you're looking at both of these bikes. The Aethos, in my opinion, continues to be the better handling bike. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think the Aethos is the best handling bike I've ever ridden. It's incredibly smooth, and its road mannerisms are just very, very refined. Riding the Aethos in and out of corners is, I don't know, let's call it magical. That's really cheesy, but we'll call it magical. There's something about the stiffness of the frame and the balance that they've struck there that is really, really well done. You can almost like load or charge the Aethos frame in and out of corners, allowing and creating for an incredible descending experience, especially on mountain roads. It just goes, it corners really well, it's planted, and it's very, very refined and predictable. Again, best handling bike I've ever ridden. Contrast that with the Tarmac, which also handles incredibly well. It's just a different type of handling. See, the Tarmac is always in what I would describe as Sport Plus mode. Always stiff, always feels like it's on rails, which over long rides and long descents can become a little bit taxing. Don't get me wrong, I've ridden the Tarmac over 6,000 miles and I understand exactly how the bike's gonna perform with every single input that I give it, and I really, really like that feeling. But it's just different from the Aethos. Now, the Tarmac is much better than the ultra stiff outgoing Venge, but it's still not as forgiving and smooth as the Aethos. When it comes to performance, I think there's a tie here, and it's the classic answer of it depends. If you're someone who's racing, who's going into sprint finishes, who's hammering with your friends, who needs every performance benefit possible, then the Tarmac is for you. If you're a more casual rider and doesn't want a bike that's gonna always feel like it's ultra stiff, always feel like it's in Sport Plus mode, then the Aethos is for you. Both bikes are exceptional, they just perform slightly differently. I've also had to take a step back and define what race means to me. While I may only enter 1 or 2 races on an annual basis, on a weekly basis, I'm racing against my friends, I'm racing against myself in some cases, and I'm racing against a group. And look, a lot of these guys that I'm riding with, they show no mercy. And some of you may say, well, look, man, if you raced all the time, you'd understand that a race is totally different. Yeah, maybe so. But for the average guy like myself, in some of these fast group rides, it very much feels like a race, and everybody's laying everything out that they have, at least before they have to go to work at 9 a.m. And so this is where the Tarmac shines, and this is where I really benefit from the stiffness and the Sport Plus mode of the Tarmac. So in these race type settings, which aren't really races, but just being competitive amongst friends, I really feel like the Tarmac shines here as well. After 6,000 miles on the Tarmac and 1,000 miles on the Aethos, this is where I've ultimately landed. If you're deciding between these two bikes, hopefully this has been helpful. As I look online, it looks like there are very few Tarmac SL7s in S-Works Pro, Expert, and Comp available. Looks like there are a few more Aethoses out there. So if you wanted a Tarmac, but you can't get one and now you're considering an Aethos, hopefully this video gives you a little bit of insight as to these two bikes and maybe the pros and cons to each. Like I said, I think they're both fantastic bikes. I don't think you can go wrong with either, but just understand if your intended use is a certain direction, one bike will suit you a little bit better over the other. Now that it's March and it's starting to warm up a little bit more, even though it's been an incredible winter here in Southern California, gonna get out into the gravel more, gonna take the Crux out a bit more, do some longer rides, adventures, stuff like that. If any of that interests you, maybe hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, give it a like. And until next time,